The restraints were too large. That was the first thing I noticed when I woke up. They had built the cuffs for something much bigger than me. The metal loops around my wrists had been sized for a creature with arms as thick as my thigh. I could feel them sliding loosely, almost politely, against my skin. Whoever designed this cell had expected a beast. What they got was a 5'11" human male from the plains of northern England, who had not eaten in at least 2 days, and whose ribs felt like someone had taken a hammer to them. My name is Cale Duran. I was a soldier. Past tense felt accurate at that moment. The cell itself was a large chamber carved from something that looked like dark stone, but radiated a faint cold light from within, as if the walls themselves were alive and irritated about it. The ceiling was high enough to hang a 2-story house inside. There were no windows. There was a single barrier on the far wall, a thick transparent panel from floor to ceiling, and beyond it a long corridor lit in deep violet light. Through that barrier I could see shapes moving, tall and slow and deliberate, like shadows that had learned to walk upright and had decided to be elegant about it. The Velhari, I had heard about them for most of my military career. Everyone had. They were the reason the deep space treaties had been rewritten 4 times in 12 years. They were the reason entire star systems had gone quiet. They were tall, plated in natural iridescent armor that covered their bodies like the shell of something ancient and patient, and they moved with the kind of calm that came not from peace but from absolute certainty that nothing in the room could threaten them. They had been right about that, in every room they had ever entered, until humanity showed up. I did not feel much like a representative of humanity's proud and confusing legacy at that moment. I mostly felt like a very sore collection of bruised bones sitting in an oversized cage. The raid on the relay station had gone wrong in the specific way that military operations go wrong, which is to say quickly and completely and in a direction nobody had planned for. I remembered the explosion, the sudden weightlessness, the inside of my suit going red with alerts, and then nothing until this ceiling and these 2 large cuffs and the low cold glow of walls that hummed faintly with something I did not understand. I sat up slowly, mostly to prove to myself that I could. My ribs screamed. I ignored them. Ignoring pain is not a special talent of mine. It is a habit, the way brushing teeth is a habit. Something you do enough times that it becomes automatic. You hurt, and you keep moving, because the alternative is staying still, and humans are not built for staying still. I assessed what I had, both arms functional, both legs functional, though the left knee had swollen to an interesting size, a dry mouth, a splitting headache, no gear, no weapons, no communicator. The clothes they had left me in were my base layer, a plain gray thermal suit, which told me the Velhari had stripped everything else. Whatever my captors were, they were thorough. The shapes in the corridor had stopped moving. I realized, with the slow awareness of someone whose brain was still waking up, that they had been watching me since the moment I opened my eyes. Several of them stood motionless on the other side of the barrier, tall enough that their heads nearly reached the top of the transparent panel. Their faces were angular, with wide flat eyes that caught the violet light and held it, the way a mirror holds a candle flame. They did not have the blunt mammalian expressions I was used to reading. Their faces were plates of structured natural armor with narrow slits for eyes and a thin horizontal line for a mouth. Reading emotion on those faces was like trying to read a clock in a language you had never studied. One of them said something. The words were sharp consonants and long low vowels, nothing I could parse, and the sound carried through the barrier with only slight distortion. Another one answered. Several of them shifted, a movement so coordinated it looked rehearsed, and then they all moved back a few steps, not retreating. Repositioning the way a scientist repositions to get a better angle on a sample. I was the sample. I had known that intellectually since I woke up. Knowing it and feeling it were, as it turns out, different experiences. I decided that if I was being observed, I was going to give them something worth observing. I stood up. Slowly because my knee was angry about it, but I stood up fully. And I rolled my shoulders back. And I looked directly at the group of tall plated creatures watching me from the corridor. I looked at each one of them in turn, held the eye contact, and then I sat back down on the flat raised surface that served as a bed, crossed my legs, and waited. There was a long pause from the corridor. Then one of them made a sound. Just one, short and almost musical. And it took me a few seconds to understand that it might have been surprise. I had stood up. That was apparently notable. I made a small note of that somewhere in the back of my mind. The hours that followed were long and quiet. Occasionally the shapes in the corridor changed, new ones arriving to observe, old ones departing. I was given water at some point, delivered through a slot in the wall in a container, that I had to hold with both hands because it had been sized for someone larger. I drank all of it. I stretched my knee carefully and assessed the swelling. I did a slow circuit of the cell, running my hand along the walls, feeling the faint vibration in the stone-like material. I noted the placement of the barrier, The slot in the wall, a second slot near the ceiling that I suspected, was for atmospheric regulation. And the seam lines in the floor that told me where the different structural panels met. I was not planning an escape, not yet. At that point, I was simply learning the shape of my situation the way you learn the layout of a new town. Information first, plans later. Then she arrived. I knew she was different the moment she appeared in the corridor. Not because of her size, though she was taller than the others, or her posture, which was so controlled. It looked like each movement had been separately approved before being executed. I knew she was different because when she appeared, every other Velhari in the corridor moved aside. Not quickly, not with any visible haste, but the space around her cleared the way. Space clears around something that generates its own gravity. She walked to the barrier and stopped exactly 2 arms lengths from it, and she looked in at me. I looked back. Her plating was not the same deep gray blue of the others. It was darker, with a deep iridescent quality that shifted between dark green and black depending on the angle of the light, like the wing of a beetle seen in sunlight. Her eyes, those flat wide lenses that I was already learning to read in the smallest increments, were a pale gold, and they did not flicker or shift the way the others had. They were absolutely uncomfortably steady. She studied me for a long time. I sat straight and let her study. I was not going to look away, but I was also not going to perform. I was just going to be exactly what I was, a man, a human, sitting in a cell, returning the attention of the person who had put him there. Something in her posture shifted, so small it was barely visible when I held her gaze without blinking. Not discomfort, more like recalibration. She said nothing. After perhaps 2 full minutes of that mutual assessment, she turned and walked back down the corridor, and the other Velhari fell in behind and around her like water rejoining a river after it parts around a stone. I released a long, quiet breath. There were many reasons I had been kept alive instead of processed or simply eliminated. The Velhari's intelligence reports on humans were, I was beginning to understand, based on our combat behavior in the field. We were aggressive. We did not accept injury as a reason to stop. We pursued objectives past the point where any rational cost calculation would have suggested stopping. We cooperated in ways that looked chaotic from the outside but produced results that other species' organized forces frequently failed to match. The reports, based on what I could infer from the reaction to my presence, had concluded that a human was something like a biological weapon, a relentless, adaptable, almost irrationally persistent biological weapon. They had built the cage for that. I was that. I was exactly that. But I was also a man who had grown up on a small farm in the north of England, who could name every star his father had shown him through a cracked telescope before the war came, and who had once spent 3 hours carefully returning an injured bird to health, for no reason, except that it was there, and it needed help. Their intelligence reports had not covered that part. I filed that gap away too, in the same quiet place where I had stored the note about standing up. They did not fully know what I was. That was, depending on how things developed, either a danger or an advantage. I was going to spend a significant amount of energy making sure it became the second one. The walls hummed. The violet light in the corridor pulsed slowly, like breathing. My ribs ached. I took a slow breath in, let it out, and started figuring out which guards changed at what interval, and what the pattern was in the atmospheric slot near the ceiling, and how many steps it was from the bed to the barrier, and whether the floor material changed composition near the panel seams. I was not planning anything. Not yet. I was just learning to read the room. That is what humans do first. We learn to read every room we are ever put in. It is not strategy, not immediately. It is something older than strategy. Something close to instinct, the deep-wired refusal to let any environment be a mystery for long. The cage was large. The restraints were too loose. The Princess Queen had golden eyes that did not blink. I had been in worse situations. I was not sure I had been in stranger ones. I sat with that thought for a while, and then I began very quietly to count. The offer came without warning. The way offers only come when someone has run out of better options. It was on what I estimated to be my 9th day aboard the Velhari flagship, a ship so large that the section I occupied felt like a small city. Though, I could only see the thin corridor beyond my barrier, and the rotation of guards who came and went with the predictable rhythm of people following a schedule, rather than thinking about it. 9 days. I had tracked time by the atmospheric cycling, which I had concluded ran on roughly a 22-hour pattern, and by the meal deliveries, which came by twice per cycle in containers still sized for something much larger than me. I ate what I could and left the rest, and the guards who collected the containers had started, I noticed, to watch me eat. Not with revulsion or curiosity exactly, with the slightly confused focus of someone watching a process they cannot fully categorize. That was how I knew my situation was still undecided. On the 6th day, 2 Velhari scientists had come into the cell with instruments and had spent 3 hours examining my injuries. My ribs, which were healing faster than their instruments apparently expected. The knee, which had reduced in swelling significantly overnight. A cut along my left forearm I had not even noticed until they pointed to it, mostly healed. They communicated with each other in low, rapid exchanges I could not follow. One of them made that short musical sound, the same one I had heard the first day. I was learning to read it as a marker of surprise, though I could not be certain. They took some samples, I let them. There was no benefit in refusing and a potential cost in being seen as uncooperative. I held still. I did not react when the instruments touched my skin, and when they finished I nodded at the one nearest to me. She, and I use that term loosely since I was inferring Velhari gender from vocal pitch and very little else, stopped and looked at me for a long moment before she followed her colleague out of the cell. I had been thinking about how humans must look to the Velhari, from the outside, with no context. The intelligence reports they would have gathered from battle observation would have painted something close to a nightmare, a species that kept attacking when it should have stopped. A species that sustained injuries, that would ground other beings, and adapted its tactics around them without pausing. A species that cooperated not through hierarchy alone but through something faster, something almost wordless, the way a squad adjusts to a casualty in real time without anyone giving an order. From the outside, without context, it would look like a kind of madness, a controlled, organized, purposeful madness. What the reports would not capture was that we got scared first. That every human in every firefight was working through a current of genuine fear and choosing to act anyway. That the reason we adapted so fast was not because we were fearless, but because fear for humans is not a full stop. It is a comma. You feel it, and you keep going, and you change the sentence. I had not tried to communicate directly with any of my guards. Not because I was refusing, but because I was waiting. There is a version of patience that looks like passivity from the outside. From the inside it is more like loading. You stay quiet, collect information, and you wait for the moment when speaking will actually accomplish something, rather than speaking just to fill the silence. That moment arrived on the 9th day with very little ceremony. I heard her before I saw her. Not her voice, the shift in the behavior of the guards in the corridor, that specific realignment that happened whenever she was near, the way air pressure changes before weather. I was on my feet before she reached the barrier, not because I planned to be, but because I had learned in those 9 days to read the room fast enough that it was already reflex. She came alone this time, no retinue, no scientists, no guards positioned directly behind her. The corridor was not empty, but the others had stepped back further than usual. She walked to the barrier and stood in her exact customary position, 2 arms lengths back, absolutely still, and she looked at me. I looked back. She spoke. The words were Velhari, rapid and clipped, and I understood nothing. But the pattern of them was different from the commands I had heard the guards use, and different from the exchanges between the scientists. This was slower, more deliberate. The pauses between phrases were longer, and her eyes did not leave mine. She was choosing her words carefully. I let the silence after her last phrase sit for a moment, and then I spoke in English. I don't know what you said, I told her, keeping my voice level and even, not loud, not soft. But I'm listening. I've been listening since I got here. She tilted her head, a small precise angle, and made a sound I had not heard before from any Velhari. It was almost a question. She reached into a panel on the wall beside the barrier, a panel I had noticed but not been able to identify, and removed a small flat device that she held at shoulder height facing me. A voice came from it, not her voice. A translated one, flat and mechanical, with her cadence imperfectly mapped onto it. You understand this, it was not a question. I nodded anyway, because I thought visible confirmation was worth giving. Yes, she looked at the device and then back at me. You healed in 9 rotations from injuries that our records indicate would require 60 or more to repair in most known species. We heal fast, I said. Among other things, she repeated. The translation device reproduced the phrase in her own language first and then back in English. And I realized it was learning in real time, building its model from both ends of the exchange. She was not using a preloaded translator. She was using something that had been recording our environment, including my movements, my meals, probably my sleep patterns, and was now being pointed at my words for the first time. That meant she had planned this conversation. She had not come impulsively. What is your name, she said. Cale Duran, I said. You? The pause was long enough that I thought I had made an error, pushed too fast. Then the translation device said her name in a form it could shape for a human mouth. Sarava. Sarava Vel are the air, I said. I had inferred that from the behavior of every Velhari I had seen around her. The one who runs this ship. I command this fleet, she said. This ship is one of 11. Then you're not just an heir, I said. You're the person in charge right now. Another pause. You speak as though this is useful information. All information is useful, I said. I collect it. It is what I do when I'm in a room I don't understand. She looked at me steadily. You have been mapping this cell. and the corridor patterns in the guard rotation, and the atmospheric cycling and the structural seams in the floor. I said it plainly, without apology. There was no value in hiding it, and some potential value in showing her that I was not pretending to be less aware than I was. I'm not planning anything. I don't have enough information for a plan yet. I'm in the reading phase. The translation device took a moment with that. Then Sarava said, in the slow, careful cadence that I was already starting to recognize as her own particular pattern, "You describe captivity as a phase." "I describe everything as a phase," I said. "Nothing stays the same. Situations develop. I wait for them to develop and I pay attention while they do." She was still for a long moment. Then she said something that the device rendered imperfectly. The grammar inverted in translation, but the meaning came through. "Your kind was described to us as mindless force. The record said humans do not think, they only act. Your record's got half of it," I said. "We act, we also think. We do both at the same time, which I understand is unusual." She held my gaze. Then she said, "There was an incident at the third-level command juncture this morning. 14 rotations into the first cycle. A guard shift that should not have been replaced was replaced. An access panel that should have required 2 authorizations was opened with 1. I was quiet. Someone is moving pieces, she said, within my own command structure. And you're telling me this, I said. I am observing, she said, whether you find it interesting. That was the moment I understood. She had not come here because she was curious about my healing rate, or my psychological profile, or what humans ate. She had come because she was in danger, from inside her own ranks, and she was looking at every resource available to her. Even the strange soft creature in the oversized cage. I did not let anything show on my face. I just said, I find it very interesting. She studied me. I got the impression that she was trying to decide how much to trust a reading she could not fully explain. The translation device hummed quietly between us. Tomorrow, she said, you will be moved to different quarters. Better cage, I said. The translation device rendered her response with a slight delay. A room, she said. Not a cage. She turned to leave. I said her name, just that, just Sarava, and she stopped. She did not turn fully, just a partial angle, enough to show me she was listening. Whoever is moving pieces in your command structure, I said, is going to move them faster now. People always do when they think the moment is close. She stayed at that partial angle for 2 full seconds, then she walked away. I sat back down on the too large bed in my too large cell, and I ran the entire conversation back in careful sequence, every word, every pause, every shift in her posture. I did that twice. Then I looked at the ceiling and thought about the fact that somewhere above me, on the same ships, someone was planning to take down the most powerful Vilharian 11 warships. And the most powerful Vilharian 11 warships had just, in a very roundabout way, told me about it. I was not sure what that made me. An asset, a test, a last resort, probably all three. I closed my eyes and I started building a framework in my head. The kind of mental map you build when you have pieces and no picture yet. A replaced guard shift, a single authorization access panel. Someone with enough influence to alter protocols quietly. Someone patient. Someone who had been planning this for a long time. The atmospheric vent near the ceiling hummed. My ribs no longer hurt. My knee was close to normal. I was still in a cage. But the door, I was beginning to think, was the kind that could swing in either direction depending on who was holding the handle. That night the attack came not on me, on her. I heard it the way you hear everything at a distance through solid walls, as vibration before sound. A sharp series of impacts. A change in the corridor lighting from violet to a hard, urgent red, and then the sounds of movement, fast and uncoordinated, which was how Velhari moved when something had gone wrong outside the plan. I was at the barrier before I was fully awake, my hands against the transparent panel, watching the corridor. 2 of the regular guards were running toward the far end, away from my cell. The third, the one posted closest to my barrier, was speaking rapidly into a communicator on his forearm, his eyes pointed away from me. My cell door was open, not wide. A gap, perhaps the width of 2 hands, where the panel that sealed the door met the frame. The emergency protocol that had changed the corridor lighting had also, apparently, triggered a pressure reset in the cell system, and the seal had not fully re-engaged. I stood at the barrier for 3 seconds and looked at that gap. Then I heard her voice, Sarava's voice, from around the corner at the end of the corridor, sharp and controlled, and clearly in the middle of something that was not going the way she intended. I went through the gap before I finished thinking about it. The corridor was cold outside the cell, and the red light made everything look like an emergency, which it was. I moved fast and quiet along the wall, the way you move when you are in a space that is not yours and you need to understand it before it understands you. The guard at the far end of the corridor had his back to me, still speaking into his communicator. I passed behind him before he turned. Around the corner I found her. She was pressed against the wall, and there was a Velhari guard between her and the corridor junction. A large one, one of the bigger plated ones, and he was not acting like a guard. He was acting like someone who had been given a single specific task. He held a weapon I had never seen before, something that looked like a very short, dense rod, and he was between her and any exit, and the two guards I had seen running were not here, which meant they had been sent away. Sarava was contained, not retreating, her posture still controlled, but the options in front of her were narrowing fast. The guard had not seen me yet. I did not have a plan, I want to be honest about that. I had a target and a direction and the specific, undeniable understanding that in the next few seconds something bad was going to happen to the only person on this ship who had spoken to me like I was worth speaking to. That was the entirety of my calculation. I crossed the distance fast and low. What happened next was not elegant. I am not going to pretend it was. I hit him from the side with everything I had, which, in the red corridor light, and with my knee not quite fully right, and my ribs only recently recovered, was not an inconsiderable amount, and the impact was loud and sudden, and we went into the wall together. He was much larger than me, plated and strong, and he recovered faster than I expected. The weapon in his hand came around toward me, and I got my forearm up, and the edge of it caught me across the side in a long scraping cut that burned immediately. I ignored the burn, not full stop. I stayed which is the only place to be when someone is larger than you and armed. And I worked fast and low, and I used every trick that 9 years of military training and actual deployment had given me. And what military training and actual deployment teach you, above everything else, is that a fight is not about power. It is about ending. You end it as fast as possible by whatever means are available, because every second a fight continues is a second it can go wrong. It ended, he went down, I stepped back. My side was burning. My hands were shaking with adrenaline, the specific fine vibration that comes after, not before. Sarava was very still against the wall. I was breathing hard, standing over a Velhari guard twice my size in a red-lit corridor on a ship I had never been supposed to board. Cut along my side, no weapon, no plan, no particular authority to be standing where I was standing. I looked at her, she looked at me. I heard your voice, I said. From the corridor, she looked at me for a long time. Then she looked at the guard on the floor. Then back at me. Her expression, within the limits of what I could read on a Velhari face, was not what I expected. It was not relief, exactly. It was the specific, deep blankness that falls over a very controlled person when something has happened that they do not have a category for. You came out of the cell, she said. The seal reset improperly, I said. You could have left the ship. I don't know the ship well enough to leave it yet, I said, which was true, but not the whole answer. She looked at me a moment longer. Then she said quietly, to the communicator on her own wrist, something in Velhari that I did not catch. Within 60 seconds, 2 guards appeared at the corridor junction, and they were her guards, the real ones, the ones with the particular uprightness of people who report directly to someone at the top. They saw the figure on the floor and their flat eyes moved to me. Sarava said something that, from the way they responded, was clearly in order. They looked at me with the same expression she had used in those early days at the barrier. That confusion-adjacent blankness. And then they did what she told them. They put restraints on me and walked me to new quarters, not a cage this time, a room. It had a proper sealed door, and a surface to sleep on that was the right size, and the first truly clear water I had been given since I arrived. My side hurt. I cleaned the cut with the water and held pressure against it, and I sat on the floor with my back against the wall because that is where I put my back when I am in an uncertain situation, against a solid surface, facing out. I thought about escape routes. Then I thought about the access panel that had needed only one authorization. Then I thought about the replaced guard rotation. Then I thought about the way the large guard had been positioned, and the absence of the regular guards, and the specific timing of the attack hitting after a pressure reset event that would have been predictable to anyone with access to the ship's system logs. Whoever was moving pieces was good at it, patient, systematic, but they had not gotten what they came for. I pressed my back against the wall and I closed my eyes. My ribs had been fine for 3 days. My knee was almost fully right. My side was cut but not deep. Outside the room, the corridor lights had returned to violet. I thought about the look on Sarava's face when she had said, "You could have left the ship." The specific quality of that silence after I had not left. I was not yet sure whether that was strategy or something else. But I was very sure that somewhere on this ship, someone was running a plan, a careful, patient plan that had been in motion for longer than I had been aboard. And that plan was going to accelerate now because its first attempt had failed. In my experience, failed first attempts do not produce caution in determined people. They produce urgency. I needed to be ready for that. I needed more information. I needed to understand the layout of this ship, the structure of the command council, the identity of whoever had sent that guard, and the specific mechanics of how power moved through the Velhari hierarchy. I had a room instead of a cage now. That was a start. Humans do not need much of a start. The next morning, Sarava came herself. Not with guards at the door. Not with the translation device held at arm's length like a formal instrument. She came with it in her hand, held low, and she sat across from me in the two available surfaces in the room, which were both flat and not quite the right height for a human, and she said, without preamble, "Tell me what you observed." I told her. All of it. From the first sound in the corridor, to the guard's positioning, to the timing against the pressure reset event. She listened without interrupting, which I had noticed was her manner. She was not a person who spoke to fill gaps. She let information arrive completely before she responded to it. That was, I thought, a good quality in someone responsible for 11 warships. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. 3 members of my Central Command Council were absent from their posts during that window, she said. 3, I said. 1 absence would be an accident. 2 would be concerning. She paused. 3 is a statement. You know which 3. I know their names, she said. I have known them for some time. Their loyalty was to the previous holder of this position. Your predecessor, I said. My predecessor did not step aside willingly, she said. A long pause. He was removed. The methods were legal within our system of governance, but not comfortable for those who had built their careers on his favor. I sat with that. And now they want to remove you. They want to destabilize my command authority, she said. Remove is a strong word. They want me to appear weak, so that the council at the Dominion Corps will appoint a regent in my absence. Which would be one of them, I said, or someone favorable to them. Her flat gold eyes were steady on me. You did not leave last night. We talked about this, I said. I am talking about it again, she said. It was not aggression. It was the way someone sounds when they are testing whether a thing they believe is actually true. The seal on your cell re-engaged incorrectly. You had a clear exit to the corridor. The guard at your station had his back to you. You had all of this, and you came toward the sound of a conflict instead. Yes, I said. Why? The translation device waited. I said, because you were the only person on this ship who had treated me like I was worth talking to. The device took a moment with that. Then Sarava said, that is a very small reason. Humans do a lot of things for very small reasons, I said. That is one of the things that confuses other species about us. The cost-benefit calculation does not always balance the way an outside observer would expect. Sometimes we do things because they are right, and right is its own calculation. She was quiet. You kept me because you thought I was useful, I said. I kept you standing because it cost me nothing. Those are the terms so far. If you want different terms, we should probably discuss them before whoever sent that guard tries again. The silence stretched. Then, in a tone that I had not yet heard from her, something that might have been the Velhari equivalent of dry. You are very direct for a prisoner. I am not much of a prisoner anymore, I said. I am, as far as I can tell, a very confused houseguest who keeps getting involved in things. The device processed that. Then a sound came from Sarava that I had never heard from any Velhari. Short, low, involuntary. It was gone almost immediately, and her expression reset to its controlled state. But I was certain I had heard it. She had laughed. It was the smallest possible laugh, the kind that escapes before the person making it has given permission. But it was there. I filed it away with great care. What do you want, she said. In direct terms, full access to the ship, I said. Not unsupervised, I understand the complications. But I need to move through this vessel if I'm going to be useful. I need to see the places where things happen, not just the corridor outside my cell. In exchange for what, she said. In exchange for telling you exactly what I observe, I said. I see patterns. Not because I'm remarkable, but because I'm a stranger. Strangers notice things that residents stop seeing. Give me access and I'll tell you every anomaly I find. She studied me. And when this is over, we can discuss that when it's over, I said. I don't like planning too far ahead. Situations develop. She stood. She held the translation device for a moment, looking at it rather than at me, and I got the impression she was thinking about something she had not fully decided. Then she said, limited access escorted. My terms, my schedule, that works, I said. She moved to the door and I said, Sarava. She stopped. The council members who were absent, I said. Don't let them know you've identified the number. Let them think the count went unnoticed. A pause. Why? Because people who believe they haven't been seen take bigger steps, I said. Bigger steps leave bigger marks. The door closed. I sat in the room, which was a real room, with a proper sleeping surface and clear water and a view through a narrow viewport of the open dark of space, streaked with the distant cold light of stars that had no names in any language I knew. 3 council members, a patient conspiracy, an assassination attempt that had failed and would, as I had told myself the night before, produce urgency in its architects. I needed to learn this ship fast. I needed to understand the hierarchy and the fault lines, and the precise way authority moved through 11 warships, and a council and a princess queen who laughed once without meaning to. I started with the room. I always started with the room. Then tomorrow, I would start with the ship. The first time I walked freely through a Velhari command corridor, the reactions were so consistent that I started counting them. Freeze, step back, stare, recovery, continued stare. I counted 11 in the first corridor alone. By the third corridor, I had stopped counting and started reading them differently, sorting between the ones who froze out of genuine alarm and the ones who froze out of status calculation, weighing how they were supposed to respond to a human walking alongside the Princess Queen's personal escort. The first kind was emotional. The second kind was political. I was more interested in the second kind. My escort was a guard named Vrel. He was assigned by Sarava. He had been given whatever briefing she had decided was appropriate, and he approached his task with the specific dedicated blankness of a professional who had been told to do a strange thing and was going to do it exactly as instructed, without letting himself think too hard about the strangeness. I respected that. I also knew that Vrel reported everything he observed back to Sarava. That was fine. I was not doing anything I would not want her to know about. The ship was extraordinary. I will say that honestly, because honesty is more useful than pride. The Velhari built things with a precision and an aesthetic that humans had not yet matched. All deep curved surfaces and integrated systems, and that faint cold light that seemed to come from within the material itself rather than from any visible source. The corridors were wide, built for beings larger than me, and the layout was efficient in a way that revealed a specific kind of intelligence, one that thought in terms of flow and function over everything else. No wasted space, no decorative concession. Every surface had a purpose. I walked through it all with my hands behind my back, which was partly a posture of deliberate calm, and partly a way to make sure I did not touch anything I was not supposed to touch. I looked at everything. I noted the placement of system access panels, the locations of the atmospheric regulators, the communication relay points on each level, the guard posts and their overlap areas, the junctions where different sections of the ship's command structure met. I was not planning an escape. I was planning for contingencies, which is different, because a contingency plan does not commit you to any particular exit. It just means you know where the exits are. On the fourth day of my limited access, I found the first anomaly. It was not dramatic. It was a pressure variation in a secondary atmospheric shaft on the ship's lower administrative level. A level I had been permitted to walk through once, as part of Sarava's effort to show the council that the human was being managed rather than indulged. The variation was small, recurring at a specific interval, the kind of thing that maintenance would investigate and find nothing wrong with, because it looked exactly like a minor calibration drift, except that the interval was too regular. Calibration drift is random. This was not random. I told Sarava that evening. She was quiet for a long moment. The lower administrative level contains the long-range communication array. I know, I said. I had noted that on the first pass. Someone is sending time pulse signals, she said. Someone is talking to someone outside this ship, I said. Regularly, carefully, in a pattern that looks like system noise. She looked at me with those steady gold eyes. How did you notice this? I counted the interval 3 times, I said. The 4th time, it matched the 3rd exactly. Natural drift never does that. She was quiet for a moment. Then, you counted atmospheric pressure variations while walking through a ship you had never seen before. I told you, I said. I read rooms, all rooms. It is what I do. The investigation she launched was quiet and targeted, and it identified within 48 hours that the signal was being directed toward a military installation 3 systems away, one with known ties to the council faction she had already identified. This gave her evidence. Not enough to act on openly, not yet, but enough to narrow the focus considerably. It also told us something else. The signals had been running for 6 months. The plan had been in motion long before I arrived. Long before the failed assassination attempt. The attempt had not been the plan. The attempt had been an acceleration, a decision to move faster because something had changed. I thought about what had changed 6 months ago. Then I thought about what had changed more recently, in the last 9 days, that might have prompted an acceleration. A human in a cage who kept standing up, who healed faster than the report said, who the Princess Queen had started visiting personally. I was the acceleration. My presence had made them nervous enough to move a timeline forward. That was not a comfortable thing to know, but it was useful, I told Sarava. She listened without expression, which I had learned meant she was listening very hard. When I finished, she said, "You are saying that your presence here caused them to act prematurely. Premature action produces mistakes," I said. "They have already made one. The guard they sent was identified. The signal pattern is now known. They are running faster than they intended, and they do not know we know." "What do they intend?" she said. "They want to take control of this ship," I said. "Specifically this ship, your flagship, because it is the symbol of your command authority. If this ship changes hands, the Council at the Dominion Corps has grounds to review your position. You become a question mark instead of a certainty, and in that gap they insert their candidate. You understood our governance system quickly, she said. Political power structures are not very different between species, I said. The details change. The mechanics are usually the same. Someone at the top, a group that wants to be at the top, a system that allows for challenge, and a moment of visible weakness that the challengers need to engineer. She was looking at me with an expression I had started to be able to partially read. It was not warmth exactly. It was something more like the face of someone revising a long-held assumption, carefully, in real time, without wanting to show how significant the revision was. What do you need, she said. 3 things, I said. First, I need access to the communication array logs from the past 6 months. Second, I need the roster of personnel who have authorized access to the lower administrative level. Third, I need you to invite all 3 of the absent council members to a routine command briefing 4 days from now. She looked at me steadily. The briefing. Bring them into a room together, I said. People who are running a shared operation behave differently in a shared room than they do separately. They cannot help it. I will be in the room. As what? She said. As the strange thing the Princess Queen keeps around, I said. That is what they already think I am. Let them keep thinking it. A pause. You want them to underestimate you. They already underestimate me, I said. Everyone does, initially. It is one of the advantages of looking the way I look. She held my gaze for a long moment. Then she said in that careful, precise cadence, You look nothing like a monster. I know, I said. That is the point. She stood, and this time she did not move to the door immediately. She stood in the middle of the room with the translation device in her hand and looked at the small viewport and its distant cold stars for long enough that I started to wonder if she had forgotten I was there. Then she said, without turning, When I was assigned this command, the records forwarded to me on your species described you as unpredictable and dangerous. They suggested that any human captured alive should be studied and then contained permanently, because the risk of interaction was too high. I waited. I filed the records and did not read them carefully, she said. I should say that plainly. Why didn't you, I said. She turned. Because I had read the field reports first, and the field reports said something the formal records did not. What did they say? I said. That in every engagement, humans had offered ceasefire negotiations before the final exchange. That in 3 separate instances, human forces had withdrawn from a tactically superior position to avoid unnecessary casualties on both sides. She paused. The formal records called this a strategic feint. The field officers writing the reports were not so certain. I was quiet. It was not a feint, was it? She said. No, I said. She nodded, slowly, once the kind of nod that is not agreement so much as confirmation of something already suspected. 4 days, she said. 4 days. She left. I turned to the viewport and looked at the stars, the ones with no human names, and I thought about 6 months of careful signals and a plan that had been running quietly in the bones of this ship long before I arrived. I thought about 3 council members walking into a briefing room in 4 days. I thought about what I would see in that room, and what I would know, and what I would tell Sarava afterward. Outside the ships, the universe was very large and very dark and completely indifferent to the small politics of those moving through it. Inside the ship, someone was running a plan. So was I. And I had a 4-day head start on the part they did not know about yet. The stars did not move. I watched them anyway. Then I turned from the window and got to work. The briefing room was on the command level, which was the highest accessible section of the ship, and it was built the way Velhari built everything, with that particular combination of elegance and severity that made every room feel like a deliberate statement. The ceiling was domed and lit from a single central source. The table was long and curved, made of the same deep stone-like material as the rest of the ship, and the seats around it, sized for Velhari, were the kind of high-backed formal things that told you this room was used for decisions that mattered. I was not seated at the table. I was positioned near the curved wall to the right of the door, behind Sarava's primary aide, coordinator Sela, who was a younger Velhari with lighter plating and the specific expression of someone managing a great deal of information at once and keeping none of it on their face. I stood, because there were no chairs my size available, and I held my hands behind my back and I watched the door. They came in separately, which was the first thing I noted. 3 council members entering a routine briefing would normally arrive together, or in pairs, because Velhari command culture, as I had observed in the past week, involved a great deal of visible alignment. You walked in with the people you were aligned with. You demonstrated affiliation through proximity. It was subtle but consistent. These 3 came separately, within 30 seconds of each other, but separately. That meant they did not want to be seen arriving as a unit. I looked at each of them in turn. The first, Counselor Davan, was older, with the darker plating that I had come to understand indicated seniority in Velhari biology. He moved with the easy control of someone who had spent a very long time in command rooms and was bored by them. He glanced at me once when he entered, a single flat assessment, and then looked away. The look said, irrelevant. The second, Counselor Mira, was younger than Davin and moved differently, with a precision that was less natural authority and more practiced performance. Her eyes swept the room in a pattern I recognized from security training. She was checking the space, not the people, the space, exits, positions, lines of sight. The third, Counselor Orev, arrived last and took the longest to settle. He adjusted his position twice after sitting, looked at the table surface, looked at Sarava's empty chair, looked at the door. He was the most anxious of the three. And anxious people are the most useful people in a room if you know how to read them. Anxious people leak. Sarava entered 90 seconds later, which was exactly the amount of time I had suggested she allow to pass. Entering last in her own meeting was a statement of authority, it said. I set the schedule. The room adjusts to me. She took her seat. The briefing began. I am not going to transcribe my briefing, because most of it was tactical logistics about a fleet positioning matter 3 sectors away. And the details are not the point. The point is what I observed underneath the briefing, the second conversation happening in posture and eye movement, and the specific silences that came when certain topics were raised. Devon was careful. He contributed precisely enough to appear engaged without offering anything that could be used. His expression did not change when the lower administrative level came up in passing, which told me he already knew about the pressure investigation and had already composed himself for this room. Mira was better than careful. She was active, contributing well, asking the right questions, and I would have had difficulty reading her at all except for one moment, a single exchange about personnel assignments for the communication array maintenance rotation, when she offered a very specific counter-recommendation that had no tactical merit but would have resulted in a different team having access to the array for the next 30 days. Orev gave her a single look when she made that recommendation. Less than a second. Not agreement. A warning. She adjusted her position and moved on to a different point. I watched Orev for the rest of the briefing. He was the link, not the leader. Davin was the leader and not the active operative. That was Mira. But the person through whom the other two coordinated. The one who carried information between them. The one who got nervous when the plan pressured him. The one who had sent that look. When the briefing concluded and the council members departed, I waited until Sarava had dismissed Sela and the aide before I spoke. Orev, I said. He is the one who moves the information between them. She had been expecting me to speak. You are certain? He warned Counselor Mira with a look when she made a move that was slightly too visible, I said. He is the regulator. He keeps the pace of the operation controlled. Without him, the other two cannot coordinate safely. And with him they have been doing it for 6 months without triggering any internal review, I said. He is very good at his role. Which means if you remove his ability to regulate, the operation either stops or accelerates out of control. Sarava looked at me. You want to separate them. I want you to reassign Orev, I said, not visibly. A routine reassignment. Something administrative. Something that puts distance between him and the communication array, and between him and the other two. Make it look like standard fleet rotation. And when Davin and Mira lose their regulator, one of two things happens, I said. Either they slow down and try to re-establish the connection, which gives us time and produces new observable activity, or they decide they have been discovered and move immediately. And if they move immediately, she said, then we need to be ready for that, I said. She was very still. You are describing a trap. I am describing a situation in which the enemy's choices tell us something useful no matter which choice they make, I said. That is not quite the same as a trap. It is more like a question with no safe answer. She thought about this for a long time. Outside the dome of the briefing room, through the small inlaid viewport near the ceiling, the stars moved very slowly as the ship maintained its rotation. There is something I need to tell you, she said. I waited. The intelligence that led to the capture of your unit, she said carefully. The raid that brought you to this ship. My attention sharpened completely. It was not natural intelligence, she said. It was manufactured. Someone provided coordinates and timing to ensure your unit's location was known in advance. I was very quiet for a long moment. The same faction, I said. The same faction, she said. The raid was intended to produce a political incident. A human unit on a Velhari relay station would have been, in the interpretation they were building, proof of a human biological weapons program operating in contested space. The kind of proof that would have required a formal Dominion response. A war, I said. A specific kind of war, she said. One that would have required the fleet to be redirected, command authority to be restructured under emergency protocols, and a new operational commander to be appointed. I thought about my unit, about the faces I had known and the ones I had not found when I woke up in the too large cage. About the explosion and the red alerts and the weightlessness. I kept my voice even. How many of my people got out? She hesitated. Then, our records indicate 6 survived the initial engagement. Their current status is not fully known to me. 6 out of 14, I breathed. The plan is not just to remove you, I said when I had the voice for it. It is to start a war. A specific manufactured war, and my people are the evidence. Yes, she said quietly. I looked at the table surface for a moment. Then I looked back at her. Then we cannot wait for Orev's reassignment to play out slowly, I said. We need to move faster than they expect. What are you suggesting? The communication array, I said. The signal's going out. If we can access the outgoing log, we can identify the contact point on the other end. The installation 3 systems away. We know the general location from the signal direction. We need the specific destination. That requires access to the array system directly, she said, which means going to the lower administrative level. Tonight, I said. Before they have time to respond to whatever Orev reports from today's briefing. She looked at me steadily. You and I, she said. You and I and Vrel, I said. Small, fast. Quiet, she was quiet for a long. Then she said, in that careful cadence that I had come to understand meant she was making a real decision, not a performed one. You came out of your cell to protect me with nothing in your hands. I had my hands, I said. Something shifted in her expression. Yes, she said. You did. Tonight. After the 3rd cycle shift, I will be ready, I said. She moved to the door, and then she stopped, and she turned back, and she said something that the translation device rendered with a slight imperfection. But the meaning was clear. Kale, she said, if this goes wrong tonight, it will not go wrong, I said. You do not know that. No, I said. But I will behave as though I do, which is almost the same thing. She held my gaze for a moment. Then she left. I sat in the empty briefing room and looked at the curved ceiling and the slow stars. And I thought about 6 survivors out of a 14 and a war that was being manufactured by people inside the walls of a ship I was standing in. And I thought about the 3-hour bird in the farm in the north of England, and my father showing me stars through a cracked telescope, and the way fear is a comma, and not a full stop. I breathed it all the way in, I let it go. Tonight. The lower administrative level was quiet at the 3rd cycle shift, the way places are quiet when they are supposed to be occupied and are not. Not the empty quiet of a space between uses. The specific, wrong quiet of a space where the people who should be there have been moved. Vrel noted it first, a slight adjustment in his posture, and I put my hand up, palm flat. A gesture that had taken me 3 days to teach him meant stop and wait. He stopped, Sareva stopped behind him. The 3 of us were still in the corridor, entrance, which was the only thing that was still going correctly. The maintenance crew for this level, I said quietly to Sareva. They should be mid-rotation right now. Yes, she said, they are not here. She looked at Vrel. He checked his communicator with the practice speed of someone used to pulling data fast in uncertain situations, and the expression on his face, which was not usually a face that expressed things, told me what he found before he said it. Maintenance rotation was rescheduled, he said, 2 hours ago. Authorization code from the coordinator's office. Sela, Sarava said. Or someone with Sela's access, I said. I was already turning over the implications. The coordinator's access, the timing, the empty corridor. They knew we would come here tonight. How, Sarava said. They have someone on your direct staff, I said, or they anticipated it. If I were running their operation and I had just sat in a briefing room, watching the Princess Queen and her human asset observe my people, I would assume tonight was a likely window for a direct move. Sarava was still. She processed quickly. I had come to know that about her. She did not spiral. She took the new information and she recalculated without drama. We continue, she said. Sarava, I said. If we turn back now, we confirm that we know, she said, and we lose the advantage of their uncertainty. She was right. I moved to the front, in front of Vrel, and we went through the corridor. The communication array room was at the far end of the lower administrative level, behind a sealed panel that required a command-level authentication. Sarava provided it and the panel opened, and we went inside. What happened next happened fast. The room was not empty. 2 of them, both large, both the heavy-plated type, positioned on either side of the array terminal. Not maintenance, not administrative staff, combat placement, 1 at each flank of the only entrance. Vrel moved. He was good, fast, committed, and he caught the one on the left before the element of surprise fully eroded. I went right without thinking, because there was no time for thinking, only for the specific kinetic arithmetic of a close-quarters engagement, and I was already moving before I had language for the plan. The one on the right was faster than the guard from the corridor had been. He connected with my left shoulder and the impact spun me into the array terminal housing, which was solid and did not care. My shoulder screamed. I used the housing to push off, and I stayed low and I worked the only angles that were available to me, and there were moments in that enclosed space when the fight was not going well. when it was close enough that I was making decisions in fractions of seconds, and some of them were wrong decisions that I corrected immediately after. I do not remember all of it in clean sequence. I remember the cold floor when one knee went down. I remember the specific sound of Vrel getting the advantage on his side of the room. I remember the edge of the terminal housing connecting with something that hurt for a long time afterward. And I remember the moment the room went quiet, the sudden stillness that a fight has when it ends. And I was still standing, and the two figures that had been waiting for us were not. Sarava was at the terminal. She had moved to it while we were occupied. I looked at her, and she looked at me, and her expression did that thing. The careful blankness with something beneath it that she could not fully suppress. And she said quietly, "You are injured." "Later," I said, and I came to stand beside her at the terminal. The outgoing signal logs were there. 6 months of timed pulse transmissions, each one disguised as system noise, all directed at the same destination. A receiving station in a system I did not recognize by designation, but Sarava went very still when she read the coordinates. She said, "Is not a military installation." "What is it?" I said. "It is a holding facility," she said, "for captured personnel, primarily used for intelligence assets." The air in the room was cold and very still. "My people," I said. She turned to look at me. "I do not know that with certainty, but it is possible." "It is possible," she said. I put my hand on the terminal edge and I breathed slowly. My shoulder was wrong in a way that would need attention. My side from the previous cut was aching from the exertion. I was standing in a communication room on an enemy flagship with 6 months of evidence of a manufactured war operation and a possible location for 6 survivors. "Download all of it," I said. She already was. We got out of the lower administrative level in 12 minutes. Vrel had a cut along one arm and moved stiffly, which he did not acknowledge, which I respected. In the corridor outside, Sarava transmitted a command sequence to her direct security staff, and within 4 minutes she had a team of her own personnel sealing the communications array and placing holds on the access authorizations connected to it. In her command chamber, which was high on the ship and had a wide viewport, across which the stars moved more visibly than anywhere else I had been, she laid out the evidence from the array logs. It was not circumstantial. 6 months of direct communication to a facility holding captured personnel, coordinated with the intelligence that had been fed to Velhari forces to engineer the raid that had captured my unit. The timing of the transmissions matched the timeline of the manufactured intelligence operation exactly. Devon, Mira, and Orev, and someone in Sarava's coordinator staff. She was quiet for a long time looking at it. "This ends the uncertainty." "Yes," she said. "You can take this to the Dominion Council." "It will not be simple," she said. "Devon has allies at the Dominion Corps. He has spent 30 years building them. A direct action against him will be challenged. Then transmit the evidence to the Dominion Council and to the fleet separately and simultaneously," I said. "Do not give him a gap between the accusation and the distribution. Make sure every ship in this fleet receives the documentation at the same time as the Corps Council." She looked at me. "You cannot challenge evidence that is already everywhere," I said. A long pause. "You think in terms of information movement." "Information is the only weapon that works in more than one direction at once," I said. She turned back to the viewport. "The stars outside were very steady." "My people," I said. "The facility." "I know," she said. "That has to be part of the resolution," I said. "I need that to be said plainly." She turned to look at me. Those gold eyes, absolutely steady, the way they had been from the very first day at the barrier. "It will be part of the resolution," she said. I believed her. That was a notable thing, that I believed her, given the circumstances in which we had met, and everything that had happened in the weeks between. But I did. I had been watching her operate for long enough to know that when she said a thing plainly, she meant it plainly. We worked through the rest of the night. The transmissions went out in the early hours of the 4th cycle. By the time the 1st cycle shift began, the evidence had been received by every ship in the fleet, and by 3 separate oversight bodies at the Dominion Corps. By mid-cycle, the holds on Davin, Mira, and Orev had been placed, and the staff member with coordinator access had been identified and contained. By the end of the cycle, 2 of the 3 had confirmed in closed session the existence of the operation, which was enough, along with the array logs, to constitute a complete record. The manufactured war had no more manufacturers. I was in the command chamber when the final confirmation came through. Sarava received it standing, which seemed right for her, and she was still for a long moment after, the specific stillness of someone processing a resolution that is real but not yet fully felt. Then she looked at me. She said, "The holding facility." "Yes," I said. "I have already dispatched a retrieval authorization to the appropriate Dominion Security Office," she said. "It will take approximately 4 standard cycles for the process to complete." I let the breath out slowly. "They will be transferred to a neutral medical facility first," she said. "Then to human-aligned space." I nodded. She said. I waited. "You came through a wall," she said. It took me a moment to realize she meant the corridor, the one near the end of part 4 of the fight, where I had gone through a maintenance access panel, rather than around it, because around it was not an option anymore, and through it was still structurally possible. The wall had a weak joint, I said. You found a weak joint in a wall while being attacked, she said. I find weak joints in things, I said. It is what I do. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, with that quality her voice had when she was saying something she had not planned to say. When I came to your cell that first day, I expected to see something that matched the files. A monster, I said. Something that required a large cage, she said. Something that explained why we had lost so many engagements to your forces. Something proportional to the damage your species has done. And instead, I said. Instead, she said. A man who was counting the atmospheric cycling. I smiled at that. I could not help it. She looked at the smile with the expression I had come to think of as her revision face, the one she wore when her model of something was being updated. What will you do, she said, when this is settled? Go home eventually, I said. File a very strange report. Answer a lot of questions from people who will not believe most of the answers. And before eventually, she said. I looked at the viewport. The stars were very bright at this height, very clear, each one a specific point of light rather than the general smear you see from a planet's surface. There is still a lot I do not understand about this ship, I said. And apparently, there is someone who needs telling that their intelligence reports on humans were not quite complete. She was quiet. I have been thinking, she said, slowly, in that cadence that meant a real decision rather than a performed one, that the Dominion has no formal arrangement with human-aligned space. No treaty, no communication channel, no mechanism for the kind of exchange that might have prevented the last 12 years. That is true, I said. That is a structural weakness, she said, a weak joint. I looked at her. Someone who finds weak joints in things, she said, and someone who commands the fleet that would need to ratify any such arrangement, might find a productive use of time in the interval before eventually. I thought about the too large cage, the too large cuffs, the long first day counting atmospheric cycles and watching tall shapes move behind violet glass. That would be a very unusual arrangement, I said. Most useful arrangements are, she said. I thought about 6 survivors at a facility that would shortly receive a retrieval authorization, about a farm in the north of England and a cracked telescope and stars with no English names, about the specific way a comma works. You will need to get me a chair that fits, I said. Everything on this ship is too large. The sound that came from her was the same one I had heard in the room where she had told me about the cage, the short, low, involuntary laugh that escaped before she gave it permission. She turned slightly away when it happened, as though she could take it back by looking elsewhere. I filed it in the same careful place I had put the first one. I will have one made, she said. Then yes, I said. I think we can find a productive use of the interval. Outside the viewport, the stars were steady and bright and indifferent and beautiful, and they had no names in any language I knew yet. I intended to learn some. The formal offer came 4 days later, delivered through the correct channels, with the correct documentation and the precise language that Velhari governance required for any interspecies arrangement. It described me as a diplomatic liaison, an official first contact representative of human-aligned space to the Velhari Dominion, pending ratification from both sides. I read it twice, then I sat with it for 2 full days. I want to be honest about those 2 days. I was not sitting with the decision in any strategic sense. I knew what I was going to do. I had known it for a while, though I had been careful not to look at it directly because when you look at a decision you are already certain of, it becomes real in a way that is both simpler and more significant than just carrying it as a possibility. I was sitting with it because some things deserve to be sat with. Some choices are not complicated, but they are large. And large things, even certain ones, benefit from a little quiet around them. On the morning of the 3rd day, Sarava came to my room. She came alone, without the translation device, which was notable because we had been without it increasingly often in the past week. My Velhari vocabulary was growing slowly, through repetition and context, and her English had developed from the mechanical reproduction of the early translation sessions into something more natural, more hers. We communicated in a mixture of both languages, filling the gaps in one with the other, and the gaps were getting smaller. She sat in the chair across from me, the one that was the right size, that had been made for me 3 days after my conversation about chairs. She sat with the ease of someone who had been in this room before, which she had. You have read it, she said. Several times, I said, and she said. I said, I have a question first. She waited. The record you kept, I said, of the first conversation between us, the translation logs from the first session with the device. She looked at me steadily. There is a moment in those logs, I said, where the device recorded a pause of 11 seconds before you responded to something I said. She was very still. I said that all information is useful, I said, that I collect it, that it is what I do when I am in a room I do not understand. And you paused for 11 seconds. You counted the pause, she said. I was listening to the recording, I said. I counted it. What were you thinking in those 11 seconds? A long silence. Then she said, in English, choosing the words carefully, the way she did when she was saying something that mattered to her. And she wanted it exact. I was thinking that I had spent a very long time in rooms I did not understand, and that I had never told anyone that, and that the pause was because I was deciding whether to say so. I was quiet. I did not say so, she said. I am saying so now, she said, which is something I do not usually do. I looked at her, at the gold eyes that did not blink, and the dark plating with its deep iridescent shift, and the expression that I had learned in pieces over these weeks, the precise vocabulary of a face that had been taught to reveal nothing, and had been choosing, gradually and carefully, to make exceptions. I am going to accept the arrangement, I said. I know, she said. You know. I have known for some time, she said. The same way you have. I looked at the viewport. The stars, those nameless ones, were out there in their usual state of complete and beautiful indifference. I need to send word to human-aligned space, I said. My commanding officer is going to need a very detailed briefing. We can arrange a secure channel, she said. And the 6, I said. When they are transferred. I want confirmation when they are clear. You will have it, she said. I have already requested expedited processing. I nodded. We sat in the room for a moment, in the specific quiet that is not empty but full, the kind of quiet that two people occupy when they have said the necessary things and the unnecessary things are available if wanted, and neither person is rushing. Sarava, I said. She looked at me. When you came to the barrier that first day, I said, what did you actually expect to see? She thought about it. A real thought, not a prepared answer. Something that matched the cage, she said. Something that had earned the distance we had kept from your species for 12 years. And instead, I said. Instead, she said, a man sitting cross-legged on a sleeping surface, looking directly at me, who did not look away. That bothered you, I said. It interested me, she said, which was at the time more difficult to manage. I smiled. She observed the smile with that careful updating expression. What did you see, she said, when you looked at me through the barrier? I thought about it honestly. The most controlled person I had ever encountered, I said. Who had come to look at a specimen and was trying very hard to look like that was all it was. She was still. You had the same question I had, I said. You just asked it differently. I was asking what you were asking what I was. Neither of us had the right category. No, she said quietly. We still don't really, I said. No, she said. I have found that less troubling over time. I looked at the arrangement document on the surface beside me. The formal language, the official terms, the structure of something that would require ratification from multiple bodies and would likely cause considerable confusion in several governments and would take, conservatively, years to fully establish. Years. Spent on a ship too large for human furniture, learning a language one word at a time, filling in the gaps in intelligence reports that had gotten half of everything right and missed entirely the other half. I thought about the cage again, the two large cuffs, the walls that hummed. I thought about a thing I had known since the third day, since I had sat with my back against the wall of my new room and looked at the stars and thought about staying when I could have gone. You cannot build a cage for something that keeps choosing to stay. That was the whole of it. That was the thing the reports had not covered, and the records had not captured, and the intelligence had not mapped. Not the resilience, not the healing, not the chaotic adaptable combat effectiveness, the choosing, the specific human tendency to find a room and learn it, and then, having learned it, to decide whether to stay in it of your own will rather than because you have been told to. I had chosen this room, not because I had been offered it, not because the terms were favorable, because the work was real and the need was real. And there was a woman across from me who had paused for 11 seconds, deciding whether to say something true and had, eventually, said it. I picked up the document. I will need that chair, I said. It is already in the room, she said. I looked around. There was a second chair, against the wall to my left, that had not been there the previous evening. Properly sized, the right height. She had brought it before the conversation, before I had said yes. I thought about that. You were certain, I said. I was prepared, she said. There is a difference. I signed the document. Outside the viewport, the stars continued their steady, ancient, indifferent burning. Each one a sun, each sun a system, each system full of rooms that someone had not yet learned to read. I had a great deal of work ahead of me. I was, in the specific way that humans are, completely ready for it. My name is Cale Duran. I was a soldier. Now I am something else, something without a clear category yet, which is, I have found, the best kind of thing to be. The cage was too large, the cuffs were too loose. The Princess Queen had golden eyes that did not blink. She built the cage for a monster. She did not have the right materials. You cannot build a cage for something that keeps choosing to stay.